Today is going to be, it's a bit of an interesting webinar, an interesting deep dive on recipes, on modernizing our recipes, which is, of course, what we do in Meez. And what does that really mean to modernize our recipes? We've all worked with physical recipes, paper recipes, handwritten, printed recipes, and we know that there can be challenges there, but it's also a very familiar state for your recipes to live in, which is why so many people can obviously just stay on that familiar handwriting, how it's been passed on. But we also end up with a static document, and we all know that there can be some pain points in that. So we're going to talk about getting recipes modernized in a digital format using the tool that we're here reviewing using Meez for different end game outcomes, of course. Many people are on Meez specifically to standardize their content across all of their kitchens and make your recipes easier to follow, scalable, take away some of the pain points of people either doing manual math or needing a visual in front of them, training, things that happen on a regular basis in restaurants, whether you have long enduring staff, you're making a menu change, so you got to train new people, or one of the unfortunate situations that we find ourselves in these days in the restaurant world. It's kind of always been a part of it, but I know everybody's really feeling that pain these days is the revolving door of hiring new help when you find them and then training them and keeping them, of course. And I think, training people is an important part of retaining people too. Well-trained cooks stick around longer. And that's one of the big reasons our tool can be so helpful too. Another big driver for modernizing your recipes is for keeping everything up to date cost-wise. The roller coaster ride that all of our products, all of our goods take is something we want to keep up to date. So having your recipes entered into a tool that when any ingredient goes up in price, when that price of butter spikes, every recipe that uses butter has been adjusted. And you have that confidence to look at them and know that your costs are up to date there. Now, again, there are different reasons for how you enter a recipe, and if costing is your main outcome, if training is your main outcome, or if getting nutritional analysis from your recipes is the main outcome, there might be a couple things that we'll do a little bit differently based on your yields, your conversions, your units of measure. Nutrition needs to be calculated by weight, by grams. And that often takes away some of the luxuries in recipes that we can leave something to be seasoned to taste and things like that, which doesn't calculate a unit of measure. Okay. Um, Anything to add to that, Doug, for old
No,
recipes?
no, I think let's dive in.
Old analog written recipes. Cool. So, starting right off the top, um, being the oldest guy here at Meez, I will jump right into those archaic printed recipes, on parchment with the edges burnt off. Not quite that ancient, although I was just seeing some really, really old recipe books last week in a chef's office that had literally recipe books from the 1790s, pretty
Oh,
dilapidated. That was pretty cool to watch as well. So what can happen with physical recipes? Well, there you go. Unless they're well preserved, like a couple of the cookbooks I got my hands on last week, they can be stained, lost, written, ripped up, um, caught on fire. All kinds of things can happen to a paper recipe book. Just like your homework, it can get eaten by your dog, all kinds of stuff. Um, Also, once we get past the obvious physical nature of a printed recipe, we don't have version control when we're talking about a printed static recipe. If your team does a lot of R&D, if you change your recipes frequently, it can be quite the task to make sure that you always have the most up-to-date recipe in front of your team to make sure they're not making the recipe the way you were making it months ago when that chain smoking chef upped the salt by 100 grams because he couldn't taste anything. So everybody's now making all the food way too salty. So little examples like that, of course. Or illegible handwriting, as Nicole put in there. And then, of course, using a static recipe, we can get into some of the basics of in the pastry world, in baking recipes where things are more precise, or even with many of our recipes, we tend to have a recipe written with a couple of columns. Here's your single batch, here's your double batch, here's the 5 times batch that we make on weekends. But scaling often needs to happen ad hoc and for different reasons. A double batch, a half batch, and sometimes the math isn't as easy as double or half. So you're relying on your team stopping what they're doing with a static recipe, pulling out their phone, their calculator, and doing the math and making sure that they're keeping the units of measure lined up because unfortunately, we have the English measuring system, and some things are going to divide by how many ounces in a pound and how many fluid ounces in a quart, in a pint, all of this. And you're relying on your team to get all that math correct in a recipe with 22 ingredients, all written in different units of measure. That can be painful, of course. So, manual scaling can lead to errors in how the food's prepared, of course, which leads to your customer tasting something different, losing faith in the restaurant, saying, that dish just isn't what I remember it being every time because somebody needed to make a two-thirds batch in the kitchen and they got the math wrong on 0.6666 when they were multiplying stuff. Um, It can also lead to waste, of course. Automatically making a double batch of something because you see that one batch is not going to get you through the projected 120 servings that you are projecting serving of this batch tonight, but the double recipe is 200. So now you're making 80 extra of something that you may or may not sell. Over prepping that can lead to waste. Hopefully you sell it the next day, but the next day you might be closed. All the different reasons why we've always seen, something that got over prepped and wishing that they could have just made exactly how much we needed for that night, give or take 1 or 2 orders for a buffer, of course.
Yeah, I think, so just to jump in here, like one of the main things that people come to us and talk about is how little they want their staff to be doing anything but cooking and prepping, right? That's what they were hired to do. And that's usually where their skills lie. So if you can give them the ability to do that more effectively and not do the other stuff that they're maybe not so good at, math, case in point, right? And unit conversions, switching between ounces and grams, like why? Why ask your team to be doing anything like that? Or scaling to weird batch sizes, or trying to figure out portion sizes based on batches. All of this stuff is easy to do mathematically in Meez. It Meez does it for you. So there's no reason to have them do this kind of work. Instead, the tool lets them go back to what they do best, which is preparing for service, executing service, ensuring consistency, all of those things that you've kind of instilled in them. So I think to me, that's one of the biggest things. I will also say that recently got feedback from a customer who had been using just paper and printed recipes. They were a large group with locations all over the country, and they were literally printing recipes, mailing them out, and hoping, just crossing their fingers and hoping that the staff at the location they were sending it to were gonna A, get the envelope, B, take it out and actually replace the old one, laminate it, everything. Like the amount of, and I'm not saying I don't know how many people on here have this kind of, this number of locations, but it's incredible that even large groups like that are, still operate like that and have these old school mentality about, or maybe not mentality, but old school habits of how to use recipes, to a point where, yeah, they're still just hoping that each location is using the most updated recipe. So
Yeah.
you're still doing that. You're not alone, but yeah,
You're not alone,
helping get
and
them out of the trouble.
especially because, as Doug was saying that, I can think of a customer sharing something very, very similar with me a couple years ago. And even funnier was, as Doug was saying that, I was wondering, I was like, did my customers say they physically mailed them or, and I believe there was a story about, well, we tried emailing them, but then we weren't sure if they were printing them and laminating them. So even just to cut that step out, they were physically putting the recipe in an envelope and mailing it to their other locations because they couldn't be sure that they would get printed and laminated if the printer was out or anything like that. So.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. So static binders full of recipes. It's what I grew up on in kitchens, the kitchen Bible, several kitchen Bibles. soups, sauces, preps, the most organized kitchens that I worked in before technology like this existed. It was in binders, and these were static recipes, and there's a whole list of challenges that goes there. Um, so taking a look at what modern recipes look like. If you're here, you are either a Meez user already, or you have some interest in Meez. Maybe you're demoing it, trialing it, checking it out. Um, but of course, we're a little bit biased, and when we talk about modern recipes, we're usually talking about Meez recipes, and that's what we're going to take a look at here. Um, I'm going to jump right in, share my screen, and jump into some recipes that will probably look a little familiar, but I just want to touch on some of on all of the features here in Meez that we can use within a recipe card. And then we'll talk about building one using a lot of these features. Now, here we are on a recipe that, again, if you've done these webinars before, if you've been on them, is probably looking familiar to you. Salumi and provolone sandwich. This is a recipe that is actually pretty much identical to a recipe from my old shop in Brooklyn, where we had stuff like this pre-sliced, our meats, our cheese got put on by the staff, and then we had sub recipes like a dressing, a vegetable mix here, lots of recipes within recipes, basically. The dressing, even having our tomatoes, our sliced onions set up as recipes. So to take away the guesswork of how thick do we slice it? That's already been done. It's been handled ahead of time by prep. So prep recipes leading to one master recipe. Um, then additionally in this recipe, we have headers, meats and cheese, toppings, which are headers that can be added here from the bottom on each section, notes and headers. What we don't have in this one yet is a note. I think the notes feature is an often overlooked, very powerful feature in Meez that lets us have a lot more control over the content that we put in here. Turning our text into, whoops, I usually have to have something made there. There we go. Now we're looking at selecting our headers, changing colors, uh, you know, making things italic, bold, adding bullet points, additional images, additional images, or even turning things into hyperlinks that can then give you, the way that you would put a hyperlink into any recipe then, and or into any document, I mean. Adding that in as a hyperlink now makes that part of your recipe that can be clicked on and take you to that next link, whether it's a video, Vimeo, or another recipe, sub-recipe that you wanted to make there.
Can I stop you there for a second, Sergio? I
Yes,
think
sir.
the thing that a lot of people overlook is the value of having headers. So that add header feature at the bottom left um, can really very easily break up your recipe into more bite-sized chunks for your staff. So I get feedback usually that around like 10 or so ingredients is where things can sometimes be get a little bit hard to follow for a lot of staff. So breaking them up by putting in some headers and just being able to make things a little easier to read is really, really valuable. So I would highly recommend if you have any kind of recipe that's fairly involved or requires multiple sets, multiple steps, things time at points where you'd have to walk away. I would really consider putting in headers for you so that you can help your staff sort of manage the process visually. And Sergio, if you, yeah, perfect. Yeah, it's a good example of just kind of how you would structure a recipe so that it's almost giving the team the ability to just sort of break it up into phases. So I wanted to point that out because it seems like it's an kind of obvious tool that's but also gets overlooked, and I think it's really powerful when you get to the actual cook, the actual end user, someone who's looking at this. You want to make it as useful as possible to them, and that's the kind of detail that can really help with that.
Yeah. Grouping ingredients here, whether it's, just a recipe with a lot of ingredients and you want them to gather their spices first, their dry goods, their refrigerated, their frozen items, So all of this can be split up, sectioned off how you need to. And then in this case, this is just really a matter of how we're building this cheese board as a recipe for your staff to follow. Again, something I did a lot in my business, sandwiches and cheese boards. And this is another great use of the notes down here is I found an image here that was, putting together, mapping a cheese plate and dropped it in there. After I ran out of room for images there, it's a good visual for them to have that they can kind of do this in their mind instead of looking at the finished product and being overwhelmed with how am I ever going to make it look that way. Um, and then we're able to then give them, of course, step-by-step actions here as we build through it. Okay, so jumping into creating a recipe like that, I want to just jump right in and grab a recipe in spreadsheet format here and start by uploading this. And I'm sure this is something that you've either seen on a demo or have possibly already done on your own. So importing a new recipe here, we select a location. And we can, of course, select from any of our recipe books here and drop it into any of those recipe books. Now from here, content that I've already copied and pasted, like I did from this recipe, can be pasted here. Same thing with prep steps. But then before I hit import, I'm going to stop and point out a couple of chances that you have here to make any edits or anything you need. First thing I'll point out is that whether these steps are numbered or not, Meez is going to number them and it's not going to duplicate numbers. So mine have numbers in them here. If I took out those numbers, like I'll do for the last two steps here, line breaks are really what separates out these steps. So as long as there's a line break at the end of each of these lines, it's going to separate and create a new prep step for us. The same thing with ingredients. If they all ran in line by line, like here, we would have a problem. But as long as there's a line break there, it's going to give us separate ingredients. Other things that are important to note, we copied this just as it was. It is actually going to create a header for protein here and a header for non-meat ingredients because of the colon that's there. If there wasn't a colon, I'm going to leave one off so you can see that one it'll try to read as an ingredient. The colons will automatically create a header for us. And then the last thing is commas that you see here, all of those things, sometimes it's prep actions, but usually what I tell people is to the first couple of times, go for it. FAFO. F around and find out. What are you going to drop in here? What might return some syntax errors? The other thing that'll happen here is parentheses will give you a field that you can leave and doesn't affect anything. Obviously, 113.0 OZ is ounces, ground pork. It's looking for an ingredient, but anything in parentheses is going to drop in the notes field and doesn't affect the search or anything that it's looking for there.
One sec, Sergio, before you
Yes.
click go. One thing that I've had a recent conversation about with customers is when they have recipes, sometimes we'll have, product ID numbers alongside it. If you have a recipe that you have relationships with your vendors and you are bringing in products that are specific to your recipes. So a lot of people will have numbers next to, let's say, panko. Yeah, they have an ID number CH1472. And that's really important if you're putting in your recipes and you want to like just retain that information. You want to put a parentheses around those because Meez will look for numbers. If it sees 1472, it might put that in the quantity for you. And then you have 1472 ounces, which is not what you want. So anything like that, just make sure you put in parentheses so that it knows that's a note, and then their other number, that's your actual quantity. So you really only want to have one number. 3.5 is fine. That's still one number, but one number that's your that Meez can uh, see as your quantity. Anything else should be in a note. Hope that was clear.
Yep. Yep. I'll point out how that can sometimes not be. So sometimes we might want to get into maybe garlic powder. What we want to put in here is um, 2 half teaspoons or something. That would not be a good use there. It might. What do you think, Doug? Would it read that, or would it mess us up with 2.5 garlic powders?
That's a good question. I think we'd
This
have
is
to
one that
find
we
out.
can test and see. Yeah. Because that can sometimes be an issue, and sometimes you're better off doing half teaspoon this way or zero point 0.5. But the logic is there to try to catch things like that. In this case, we'll see. I think zero point 0.5 might have given us an error. See, 2.5 teaspoons is what we ended up with there.
Is that
Even
what you,
though there may or may not be a half.
oh, you wanted 2 half teaspoons, I see. Yeah.
Exactly. Yep. So not the not exactly what we would want to get there, although there might be a half teaspoon somewhere, and if there isn't, then we could define that unit.
Yeah. So 1 teaspoon would have been
Yeah,
the way to go. Yeah.
exactly.
One of
Instead of
the,
two half
one of the
teaspoons.
honest truths here is that, you want to check these recipes as you put them through. Meez will capture a really good amount, and it's much, much faster than any other system. But it is a computer. It is gonna, and recipes are written in many different ways. It might, find something that and put it in the wrong place. So just check it over, make sure you give it a quick scan. Some people put in a capital T to mean tablespoon and a lowercase t to mean teaspoon. Me's unfortunately won't recognize those. It'll assume they're both, I believe, tablespoon. So there's elements to it that you just want to make sure you're kind of looking over and checking. Um, did we lose Sergio? He looks frozen.
He does look frozen.
That's
And his screen is frozen, so
great. Oh, and he's gone.
he's gone.
Well, we experienced some technical difficulties, everybody. Stand by for a few minutes. If only I wasn't experiencing technical difficulties, I'd be able to jump in and put my screen up. But
I
it looks
can
like
go,
I
I
don't know
can
what's going on.
drive, Doug. I can drive.
Yeah, just one pull up. Pull up the
Yeah,
recipe.
I think I can get into the Brooklyn larder ones.
Okay,
Okay.
you good.
I'll go ahead and share.
Yeah, because mine's not quite working. Sorry about this, everybody. Hopefully we'll surgically be back soon. All right.
So I can get into Brooklyn larder if there's anything in here.
Let's see.
Oh, Sergio's back.
Hello.
Where'd you
Hi.
go, Sergio?
We're sharing Nicole's screen now. And I'm in the Brooklyn larder access that you gave me here. If there's something you want me to drive or I'm
No, I don't know if you're still in the new recipe that we just uploaded, or I can jump back in. Sorry about that, folks.
all good. Up to you,
You
Serge. I
want to take back
can
over,
kick
sir?
it back to you. All
Yeah, I can jump back in,
right.
so I don't give you the added pressure of reading my mind, Nicole. So I'm not sure where I cut off, but it looked to me like Doug froze first after we moved on from this one. But I wanted to point out the protein header did not come through as I mentioned. Non-meat ingredients with the colon after it came through as a header. This, it's trying to look for an ingredient, so we could then just create that again if we had an error there. And same as you can always move these around and put it up where we wanted it to be original. And then you see on the notes field here for the ground pork where I put Kurabuto pork, it just dropped that in place. And the CH142 code number for Panko dropped in that place there.
Yep.
Okay. Now, continuing from here, we have the ability to drag and drop images here. We can drag and drop these from any folder on our desktop if we're bringing in anything like that. No. So whether it's, images, um, prep images, or anything like that, we can drag and drop, or we can simply open this later on our in on a phone, on a device, and add these steps in step by step, take them directly from a phone, and then we're viewing meatballs or whatever images we've dropped in here to do step-by-step builds that way.
Yeah, and just keep in mind that, some of the just one of the best tips I've heard from customers is just you're probably training people all the time. There's always new people. Or you just need to retrain on new dishes. Just take advantage of those moments and have either yourself or someone else take out a phone and start recording as you're explaining it, or have one of the, your more senior team members doing it. It doesn't have to be, perfect in the beginning, just, something to get in there, a picture, a couple pictures. If you happen to have access to a GoPro or something that you can mount on your head, I've seen great videos and pictures that are, point of view of somebody actually making it, so it's really easy to follow. I highly recommend trying those kinds of ideas out just to get something up there, because a lot of people struggle with just getting over that kind of first hump of like, oh, what is it going to look like? And I think if you just start doing it, start getting stuff in there, you'll start to learn the process and start to feel a lot more comfortable with it. So, yeah.
Yeah. Just jump in and have somebody taking a film over your shoulder, recording audio. Any step like that, is obviously giving you Meez gives you tons of bandwidth with up to 2 minutes of video or an image per prep step, and no limit to how many prep steps can be added here. Okay. Okay, now going back to the beginnings of our recipe here. Wanted to kind of finish building out here. So in the line by line search, so there's a couple of things here that are already in play, like prep actions. Selecting an ingredient that has prep actions, or any ingredient you can create your own prep actions to. Meez has these built in. If it's your first time on one of our webinars or you're newer to Meez, just to quickly cover, these prep actions will affect what the cost of these items is. So we're paying 16 cents here for chopped parsley. And if we were to change that prep action to rough chop, to maybe just picking the leaves here, then we'll see that that cost changes because there's a different loss there. You're picking leaves now, you're being more selective, you're probably tossing some of the wilted ones instead of just chopping down. So that's a little bit higher cost, almost double the cost there of just chopping straight down the stems, because we're not plucking the stems in there. So one of the reasons there why prep steps are important, and unlike so many other recipe tools, would actually have you creating another recipe for parsley leaves. Within Meez, you can create that right within ingredients, and they can have as many prep actions as you want to create, or that the system already has preloaded into it.
Do you want to show real quick where on the ingredient page they can find prep actions?
Yep, of course. So when you're looking at your ingredients here, any one of these, and it's the Meez system ingredients, any of these that have been custom ingredients, I could always add a prep action, but a Meez system ingredient like onion is going to have all these prep actions with all this information kind of behind the scenes. So that if I decide to use this and say these are sliced onions, now I have a conversion for weight to volume, and it's also taken into account the yield loss of taking the skin off, so that when I need a pound of sliced onions, I actually need 1.3 pounds of raw onions to start based on this.
Yeah, and just to be clear, you can create new ones if you want. So if you want to just quick go back to that or go to any of them, you can just click edit and you can create new prep actions. By clicking that plus add prep action, you can edit prep actions. So all of these are customizable for you. But you have to remember that they exist on the ingredient page here. So they exist on iceberg lettuce, the ingredient, and then to apply that prep action, because it's not automatically applied, you go into the recipe it's on, click the ingredient, and then select. So it's a great way to kind of learn how Meez ingredients interact with Meez recipes. This is a really great kind of tool to play with and learn from.
I see a question here. A way to upload many recipes, or does each one need to be cut and pasted in? This is currently a one recipe at a time process with the cut and paste. However, we do have a bulk upload feature in development, and we do also have a recipe upload service, which is our team of dedicated Meez power users. All of them really with some kind of culinary background that we onboard customers all the time who are ready to go. But the difference between launching Meez when you're just opening your restaurant and you have the time to R&D your recipes, that's the ideal state, of course. But of course, many restaurant groups come to us and the airplane's already at 30,000 feet, and now they want to start fine tuning it so they can hand us all their recipes in any format, and our team will do that kind of bulk uploading. It's just faster uploading. Um, so I hope that helps. We will keep you posted for sure. You will hear a big release announcement from us when that bulk upload feature is ready to go. Okay, I was going to jump back into this recipe again quickly, um, and back into the one that we're building here. So another thing that we wanted to point out here is creating your own units. So when it comes to something that maybe you use on a regular basis, or rather than in the prep kitchen, which is where we would probably be building these meatballs, and we know that there's a cup measure or they're going to weigh this Parmesan out, let's talk about maybe we are making a recipe for a pizza that's going to be made every day on the line. Just switching screens here. And so here, maybe what we want, instead of half a cup of shredded mozzarella, because then we're going to get into cooks arguing with, well, which cup? There's a measure. There was one here, and I had a cup measure on the line. Somebody took it in the prep kitchen or whatever. And unfortunately, what we probably want is exactly how much weight of the shredded mozzarella is going on the pizza, quarter pound, because that's how we buy it, and we need to know exactly how much we're spending on every pie. For that quarter pound, instead of having them measure a half a cup, which if the half cup measure isn't found exactly, then you're counting on them filling that cup up halfway. Maybe we create a measure called a cheese scoop. And this is, whatever. It's that special green scoop that we found that's exactly half a cup. And we want our team to only use that scoop. We want to duct tape it to the line so it never gets lost. So we're going to create a unit called a cheese scoop, and it is exactly half a cup. We could also define that as a quarter of a pound if we wanted to. We're going to define it in volume because it is a scoop, but it's only ever going to be used for measuring out our cheese. So now we can call that a full cheese scoop in that recipe. And if we were to measure that by cup, we see that it is actually half a cup or quarter pound of mozzarella. But as far as our team's concerned, when they open this recipe, they're going to see cheese scoop. Now, I'm using that scoop, but I'm sure everybody has something in their mind that they have measured like this before. A ladle that you put a special piece of tape around so everybody knows this is the ladle you want them to portion the soup with. Anything like that can now become the unit that you have here to call out, even put it in the notes. Make sure you only ever use the cheese scoop. And that's how easy it was to define it. When we created it, it just said, what is a cheese scoop? And we said it's half a cup. We could have said it's a quarter pound. Obviously, with different products in it, that might change. But now we've got our team looking at a straight cheese scoop every time. Okay.
Yeah, this really speaks to the kind of original point of the webinar today, which is it's really important to just keep in mind what your goal is as you're building these recipes, right? So what Sergio just did is define that cheese scoop. That's crucial for, his line. Like making this easy for the staff to know what they're supposed to use and for what purpose is crucial, right? But he had to define it. He had to define it as a, half a cup so that there was a cost element to it as well. So it means you can accomplish both, but you do have to make sure that as you're, entering in these custom units, you do define it in the right way, so that when you click on the cost tab, you're not seeing an error message. So at the end of the day, Meez will only know how to calculate what you tell it to calculate. And so that's a really important kind of moment, just to make sure that you have all those definitions in place as you're as you're customizing this.
Any other questions on that? Oh, I see somebody asked about the upload, and Nicole put a link in there for you guys. Excellent. Okay, so sub recipes created right within that recipe. Let me just touch on that because I put a note there for myself. So let's say we're doing a special blend of cheese that we put together here. Pizza blend of cheese. So we write that up. Nothing turned up in our ingredient search, but we can create a new ingredient or we can create a new recipe. So say we want to create a recipe for that is, mostly mozzarella, some Romano, some provolone. Now we have another recipe, just like we have the Calabrian tomato sauce and the pizza dough here. And currently it's an undefined recipe, but Meez does give us the ability to create that recipe on the fly, so to speak. So we decided that we wanted to switch to our blend of cheese instead of the straight bag mozzarella. Now we have a recipe to create. And that can be as easy as, this is going to make 10 pounds of cheese, and it's going to be 5 pounds of shredded mozz, etc. So easy enough to just create that. And 5 pounds of another cheese. And then we have that recipe there. Whoops, we didn't save that last one. Anyway, so now we know that we have our pizza blend of cheese recipe has now started to be made there. And that'll pull in the cost as we start creating that recipe. Now, one quick pro tip, as we call them here at the end of each section, is defining your yield. If your main outcome here is costing, then defining your yield by a unit, by a serving, is going to be key here. In any recipe that you make in Meez, of course, your yield can be defined in volume, in weight, or in count. And you can always have, if your ingredients are all defined, we can always have Meez auto calculate this yield for us. And it'll simply sum up the ingredients here. Not recommended often for items that you're going to cook, like this tomato sauce. So in volume, or even better, in servings, is a great way to do this. So this is our sauce. So 6 quarts. We know we're going to put it on the pizza in volume. So that works there. And then the actual pizza recipe itself, we wanted to see, the final yield here is a pizza. And I'm wondering if this is one that I've done by the slices as well. So I've also defined my one pizza as 8 slices. That's because I want to be able to cost my pizza either by the slice or by the whole pie. So now when I go to my calculator, I can say that my portion size is 1 pizza or 1 slice, and then I can cost out what I want to charge for slices, as well as what I want to charge out for the whole pizza. Any questions on that? Does that make sense? Defining a recipe by having Meez auto-calculate the weight, that is great. Just keep in mind that it doesn't take into account any cooking time, of course, so it's just going to give you a lump sum of your ingredients. That does give you costing. Where it's awesome to cost your final items by the unit, by the serving, is when it's your final plate. 1 pizza, 1 serving. 1 piece of polenta that you might put 2 pieces of polenta on a plate with a steak or with a chicken. 1 portion of pasta. If you're boiling 6 boxes of penne, and you know that gives you 10 orders per box, so you're going to have 60 orders, defining the yield as 60 orders is going to give you an exact cost of that penne pasta in every portion, because that's how you defined it. Of course, it could also be in weight. Anything to add there, Doug?
Yeah, I think that's about it.
Cool. Now, as we've talked about too, scaling a recipe is one of the keys, or one of the main drivers that people might be using these as well. So jumping back to this good old salami provolone recipe. This giardiniera recipe, that is part of the salami provolone here, 2 tablespoons. This is a great example of what I was describing before. Here's a recipe with a lot of ingredients in kilos, in grams, heads of cauliflower, gallons of liquid, cups, grams. This is not a recipe that I want my team scaling. And here the yield is defined as 1/6-inch third pan, because when we R&D'd this recipe and made it, that's what made the most sense. The team understands that. That's a deep third pan. Third pans, hotel pans. Meez does have those volumes programmed in, so we know how many quarts that is. And now my team can, of course, scale this if they need a half batch, if they need a single batch, that double batch. Great, it's doing the math for them then and doubling. But just like I said before, often the scaling that we need isn't as simple, quote unquote, because I think in this recipe, even the half batch isn't something simple because you're dividing by kilos, you're dividing by heads, by weight, by volume here. But half, double, triple, the exact amount that we need, 3 quarts. It's doing all this math so that our cooks are going to be meticulous and their jardiniere is going to taste exactly the same, whether they're making 3 quarts or 30 gallons. It's going to scale everything in what we call smart scaling here, so that it's also then going to be giving them, if it's something in cups, you see that it jumped up to quarts and then cups and gallons. And so nobody's measuring tablespoons of water, 3,000 of them or anything like that. And then, of course, by any of the ingredients. So again, this recipe that's problematic and my team has a hard time scaling it. Maybe they're out of jalapenos that day and they're slicing jalapenos and they know they're not going to get anywhere close to 4 cups. They slice them all and they barely have a cup and a half of sliced jalapenos in the house. Now they're going to make this recipe. It's a little more than a third, but it's exactly what they need. It's the exact amounts to get the exact same result consistently.
Yeah. So just to kind of clarify one quick thing, all Sergio's doing right now is working in what we call view mode. There's no editing happening right now. So if you hit refresh, it's going to go right back to the original recipe. This is something that you can do as a owner of the account, as an editor. You can work in a view mode all you want. It's not going to affect the recipe because only when you click that edit button and you start changing values, that's when that will start to actually change the recipe. And yeah,
Yeah.
Doug, it looks like you're yes, it will scale the entire recipe if you change the value of one item. So if you only have 150 grams of red onion, if you just click the 207 and type in 150 and hit enter, everything else scales according to that one line. So obviously that's in a real world situation, it's very common to just be out of one of your ingredients and have to kind of pivot and change how you're prepping. And just very simply, Meez will have all of that scaling done for you. So yeah, just wanted to clarify that
Yeah.
this is anything having to do with editing the recipe. It's all kind of surface level scaling and adjustments that anybody can make. And if you just hit refresh, it's going right back to the original.
Yeah. Now, in the event that maybe this is something that comes up a lot, maybe the scale got dropped on the floor. People are consistently, when they slice the jalapenos and they got capsicum all over their fingers, they don't want to touch the next thing. And they just want to be able to measure it quickly in a cup. And you want it to always read in a cup. So now I just did the conversion, 4/8 of a cup. When I hit edit, though, to make that change, it's going to show me how it was originally written. It doesn't keep that conversion until I go in and actually make that change, right? And then I call it 4 cups or whatever that was, 4 1/8 of a cup. And I change that right here. And now that becomes the permanent way that the recipe is written. And now if I change that back to grams, we're missing point or 1/8 of a cup there in grams wise. Okay.
Beautiful.
Cool. So we talked about defining units of measure. And I think now, Doug, I would like to talk about units of measure. I'll keep driving too. When it comes to defining a unit, some of the most commonly, misnamed, or I don't know what the word is I'm looking for. Your vendors are going to use things like bunches
Yeah,
bushels.
you're looking at stuff like anytime produce vendors tend to be the biggest culprits in this, and I'm sure anybody who's on this webinar knows when they look at your produce, invoice, it's just case, bunch, bushel, all of these items that are just what Meez would consider undefined, right? From a strictly, math oriented, what is a bunch? A bunch could be 4 ounces, it could be a pound, it could be any number of things depending on what product you're buying, right? So we in Meez have a bunch of definitions of average weights of a bunch, but essentially what a bunch is, if you want to click on that equivalency tab,
Hmm.
a bunch fits in under the each category. So one thing that I really would love for you to take away from this webinar is just a basic understanding of how this tab U of M equivalency, meaning unit of measure equivalency, works. A bunch, a case, a pack, a packet, any of those are what we call eaches, meaning it could mean anything. It could mean any value. Um, in this case, what we've described to me is when I say one bunch of scallions, I mean 3.5 ounces, which when chopped produces about 10 fluid ounces. By telling that to me is we're fine now with having the invoice say it's 60 cents a bunch, or $5 for 6 bunches or whatever the invoice says. If it happens to be by the bunch, we've defined this now and said, well, when I mean a bunch, I mean this amount of weight and volume. And by doing that, now we can use scallions in our recipes by weight, by volume, or by bunch. But you would never want to use, for instance, piece in your recipe, right? Because piece is also an each. And in this case, you don't want to confuse the program to say, well, one bunch is 3.5 ounces, but one piece is a different value. So just keep in mind, eaches can mean many different things. You want to be strict about how you approach each item in Meez itself when you're defining these. So if you were to see bushel come in off the invoice, same idea. Let's define what a bushel is. A bushel is 11.1 pounds or, 65 pieces. I'm not sure exactly what
Mm.
the common bushel is. I
Yeah, a bushel means different things. A bushel of oysters means 100 oysters. A bushel of corn, something totally different. Yeah.
Yeah. Or you could just call your vendor and ask them, please give us some weights on things. That would help everybody out, including your fellow restaurateurs. Um, but yeah, making sure you kind of are looking at the equivalency tab, looking at the cost tab, and judging whether or not when you see that cost, if you click on the cost tab for me, Sergio, if you see that purchase unit say bunch, and you're not going to be putting the word bunch anywhere near your recipes, you want to just check the equivalency and say, okay, how has this been defined? Do I need to write in how much a bunch weighs so that I can use this by weight? Okay. Does that make sense to everybody? I know this can be a very confusing topic, so feel free to chat in if you have any questions. But parsley would be another example of a bunch. If you had a bunch of parsley, might only be 1 ounce. So we would want to define that differently. We would go to parsley, and there we would be able to find a place to put a new specific equivalency, and that is one bunch is in this case 5.7 ounces. So bunches can mean different things in different contexts for this. Okay, and it all just is defined on the ingredient level. Every ingredient has an equivalency, so you can get very custom with how you want to do this.
Yeah. As do your recipes. So when you create a recipe, like an ingredient, it's going to default to a standard unit of measure equivalency, just like an ingredient that's been created. We can always turn this off because a sandwich does not equal 8 ounces to a cup. How do you even get a sandwich into a cup? So probably the only time we would want to define this unit of measure equivalency would be for the nutritional values of our sandwich, because nutrition is calculated by weight. So it would be taking all the ingredients and want to give us a calculation of how much the whole sandwich weighs.
Exactly. Yeah. So I would recommend everybody on the call, check out the equivalency tab on your various recipes and ingredients you have, and play around with it. If you ever run into an error message that says this is missing a conversion, a pretty common error message when you're looking at your costs, If it ever says you're missing a conversion, what it's telling you is go check the equivalency tab. This is where you're probably going to find your error. And the likelihood is you're buying it one way, but you're using it another way. So you're buying it by the, the pack and you're using it by the ounce. We just need to know how many ounces are in a pack. So sounds very easy, but actually it can be very confusing when it gets just to each individual item. But luckily, Meez is here just to give you that every single page has that equivalency because of this issue. We want you to be able to customize this and make it work for every invoice that comes in.
Yep.
All right.
Oh, we are coming up on time. Does anybody have specific questions here on what we've been covering? Any particular issues you've been struggling with, and while you have us, want to drill us on?
Here's one.
Mapping ingredients to recipes. So Doug, do you mean the purchases being mapped to the recipes so that you have costing? Yes. All right. So let me jump back in here. So here, let's say I had something like my black pepper here has not been costed yet. So in this case, that could be because I haven't purchased this black pepper yet, or for whatever reason I don't have a purchase of it showing up here. Now here, if I had purchased black pepper recently, it'd be really cool if I did have it here. But if I had, I would see it showing up here, needing to be mapped. So that would be mapping a purchase item to an ingredient. If that was the case, if I had it there, or I'm just going to map something bogus to black pepper here. We could also see that we have something with a price here. In this case, this is trail mix. But here, if I wanted to map it to black pepper, my ingredient missing a cost, is I would simply look for that ingredient that I have in my system without a cost on it yet. And these green apples show me these are ingredients that I am currently using. And then I will be mapping the price of this trail mix, $24.65 for a 5-pound case, to black pepper. Does that make sense, Doug? And that would be how you map it and how it makes that connection. Now, this trail mix, or let's say it's, Telecherry peppercorns, this purchase would then be mapped to black pepper, or whichever one I select, maybe black peppercorns, which I can then grind. It'll be mapped to that ingredient with the unique item ID. In this case, they use the same name, but usually this would be a vendor ID number 123456. Now, if I buy a different peppercorn or the same peppercorn from a different vendor and their unique ID number is 654321, I will have to remap that even if it's the exact same product because it's that item ID number that's going to connect it to my ingredient to make sure that it updates the cost with that. But if it's the same old black peppercorn that I've already mapped, item ID number 123456, the next time it comes through, it will not even appear on this table. It'll simply update the price up or down. Okay. Got that covered for you? Ingredients first before you put in recipes. Actually, Doug, I'm so glad that you asked that. Not necessary. Meez already has, whether you see them here, and I'm assuming you're a new user, you're looking at a brand new account, all these ingredients aren't here yet. The Meez system ingredients are, though. And the way you're going to find those is when you start creating that first recipe, your recipe numero uno, the first one that you create, that's when you start actually adding your own ingredients in.
Sergio, are
You
you
could
trying
up.
to share your
Sorry?
screen? You sharing the screen? You're trying to?
Oh, I'm sorry, folks.
There we go.
So here, as you start using these, anything that you start typing in here, you will see the ingredients already exist. Meez system ingredients with that Meez logo. That means we've got conversions built in for these. What we don't have is cost yet. The green apple says rice vinegar is one that I've already put in a recipe. It doesn't necessarily mean I've attached the cost to it yet. But this is where Meez is very different from other software because we always thought about the creative side first. Creative meets profitability in Meez. You can jump into Meez the first day you've purchased your account and start creating, start building recipes. Tarragon vinegar, vinegar, malt vinegar. Use the ingredients that you're familiar with, create ingredients. After the fact, we connect your purchases to your ingredients so that you then have your rice vinegar connected to rice vinegar, your King Arthur Sir Galahad flour connected to what in Meez was all-purpose flour. So the specifics of a brand or the specific cost is the only thing not in Meez, which you could upload so that your recipes are immediately costed as you build them. But even as you build a recipe, it can be that easy to cost it just as you're going through it anyway. So you can always jump right in and go into this new meatball recipe. A lot of these costs were already there for items that I'd already put in, but anyone that I hadn't, I can do it as I go along here. So maybe I'm just setting up and I don't have my invoice scanning going yet, but I know the ground beef cost me about $8.99 a pound, and I can just start doing this so that I'm getting a sense of a cost until I start connecting my invoice processing. All right. I was just reading.
So I got one more question. You just went on silence earlier.
Whoops.
Reports or data analytics. Do you have your screen up with it with the analytics portion?
Sure thing. I will not be able to dive too deep into this as we're running out, but we do have a couple of webinars that you can see on here in the Meez community, and we cover a lot of this in our couple of last ones. So looking into a menu is where you're going to have the reporting and analytics features. I'm pulling up a menu that I've created here that I've already entered sales quantities into. So a complete menu, meaning all my recipes are linked. I've put in sales quantities here. This is where I'm going to be able to get analytics from that menu, and it's going to give me reporting based on usage, based on my top performers, dog star, legend chart here, plotting each one of my items, bestseller, paying the bills as opposed to items that need to move better. And then there's additional analytics here on your best performers, ingredient usage by percent of sales. So I definitely, Doug, recommend that you check out on our community page the webinars, which I will point out here quickly. Oh, actually, I don't have that bookmarked here, but maybe Doug can drop that link in the chat for the webinar series. Definitely recommend the last couple of sessions. We've gone deep into menus, analytics, and inventory analytics as well, Doug. Okay.
Real quick.
Thank you all for your time. Doug is dropping that link there. We will be following up with an email, of course, which will have a link to today's session, and look for our next webinar in a couple of weeks.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone.
Thank you all very much for your time.